Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander just recently spoiled from Zendikar Rising, Taborax Hope's Demise. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Taborax is a 2/2 demon cleric with flying for 2 generic and 1 black, already passing the vanilla test. Additionally, he also has lifelink as long as he has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on him, which shouldn't be a problem in this deck, you'll see. His triggered ability is what this deck will focus on most. Whenever another non-token creature we control dies, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and if that creature was a cleric, we may draw a card. If we do, we lose 1 life. This is the Shadowborn Apostle Demon that was leaked a couple of days ago, and now that I've seen the card, I know it's real, and the deck I was brewing and testing for it was definitely not in vain. Now it just remains to be seen if Shadowborn Apostle is in fact reprinted in Zendikar Rising, and if it's still at common rarity. WotC supposedly doesn't recognize a secondary market, but somehow Rhystic Study was reprinted at rare from common and Mana Drain at mythic from uncommon. But that's a discussion for another day. The fact remains that when we sacrifice 6 apostles at a time, we not only cheat a demon onto the battlefield from our library, but them being clerics mean that Taborax can very easily become huge enough to take out an opponent via commander damage, and it will always keep my hand full of cards. This episode of the Brewery is practically a micro brew since we can run as many copies of Shadowborn Apostles in this deck. In this case, the deck is running 40 of them. The reason we're running so many of them is because of Throwing Stone. If we manage to get Throwing Stone on the battlefield before we cast the next copy of Shadowborn Apostle, then we can quite literally get all the remaining copies in our deck onto the battlefield. In and of itself, that's quite the feat, regardless of our commander or not. I found that 40 was a decent enough sweet spot for a number with Throwing Stone. Having the deck be 40% Shadowborn Apostle means that we have the following hypergeometric distribution. Looking at the results, we see there is about an 88% chance of us hitting at least one Shadowborn Apostle in the first cards drawn. This means that there's an incredibly high likelihood of us getting all the Shadowborn Apostles remaining in our deck when we resolve the first one with Throwing Stone on the battlefield. Also, the probability of us getting at most one Shadowborn Apostle is about 47%, which is almost a coin flip. This means that it is more likely to get multiples of them in the first 4 cards rippled, with each multiple further triggering Throwing Stone, thus helping for the few times we might whiff because we still have more triggers on the stack to go through. In fact, to further help these odds, the deck's running all 5 fetch lands to thin the deck of lands. These lands needing life to activate also happen to synergize with the deck, but we'll see that later on. However, these lands can also help us get Witch's Cottage onto the battlefield. If we're running out of apostles to further ripple into Throwing Stone with, and don't want to risk it, we can get the cottage in order to top deck a Shadowborn Apostle from the graveyard in order to guarantee a trigger. Now, having this insane amount of Shadowborn Apostles in the deck doesn't just benefit the commander, but getting 6 of them in a relatively short amount of time is very doable. The deck has a couple of demons to help us win the match, and the first target to cheat onto the battlefield is definitely Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. Thanks to Razaketh, each Shadowborn Apostle can be sacrificed for just 2 life, and we can tutor for any card. The first card we should definitely try to go for is Throwing Stone. However, the deck is not a glass cannon. We can still make do even if Throwing Stone is dealt with before we can go off. The deck is running Coat of Arms and Akroma's Memorial to make an insane board presence. Taborax is also a cleric, so the apostles also pump it via the Coat of Arms. The Memorial gives each of our creatures a keyword soup that makes them potentially end the game right then and there, especially if we emptied our library of Shadowborn Apostles onto the battlefield thanks to Throwing Stone, because now they have haste. Akroma's Memorial also helps her when we reanimate all of our apostles with either Rise of the Dark Realms or Living Death. After we sacrifice them for value, whatever that might have been, we can then reanimate them all back to either get even more value for them, or to then use them the same turn we animated them as a wave of an insane amount of damage thanks to Coat of Arms. Since we can use Taborax to dig through our deck at the cost of life, same with using Razaketh as a tutor on a body, Whip of Erebos is included to take advantage of the size of the demons in the deck to regain a lot of that lost life. It can also be used to reanimate any key demon or fatty in a pinch in case they were dealt with, so that we get another chance to go off. Getting Razaketh online means that we can also tutor for Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood, which is a game-ending combo once it triggers. Since they feed back off of each other, once the loop begins and no one is able to interrupt it, we win the game. This also makes Whip of Erebos helpful in gaining us the life needed to begin the loop. Remember also that Taborax can gain lifelink, which also begins the loop. Other demons we can cheat onto the battlefield as other ways of winning with the deck is Ob Nixilis Unshackled. Similar to Taborax, this version of Ob Nixilis will get insanely huge every time we sacrifice our apostles. It has trample as well as flying, meaning that's even harder to avoid. As a bonus, it makes opponents lose 10 life and sacrifice a creature whenever they search through their library. So whether they're tutoring or ramping, they're going to lose a huge chunk of life and lose a creature as well. Archfiend of Despair is another interesting demon to cheat with the Apostles. It's a 6/6 flyer, making it quite the beater, but it also has all opponents lose the same amount of life as the current player lost during their turn. So if we lose a lot of life during our turn because of Taborax, Razaketh, or other effects, all of our opponents lose that same amount of life at the end of the turn, especially when combined with Necropotence. The moment we have more life than the rest of the table, we can just sink enough life into Necropotence, and then the Archfiend will make all of our opponents lose that much life at the end of the turn. Oh, and either way, Necropotence is super amazing on its own since we're able to draw into a ton of cards. Speaking of drawing an insane amount of cards, Villas, Broker of Blood, can convert that loss of life into card draw. Combined with Taborax, we can essentially draw 2 cards from 1 life every time an Apostle is sacrificed. Villas can also be used as removal since we can pay 1 black mana and 2 life to give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn, which will also draw us 2 cards because of it. Harvester of Souls is another great demon for drawing us cards without having to lose any life because of it. This one might be a better choice to get before Villas, but if we need to get rid of creatures in a hurry, Villas would be the priority. That being said, the Harvester is a 5/5 with Death Touch, so it's also quite the beater and attack deterrent. However, if we really want to get rid of creatures, then the best cards for the job are Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. Thanks to the Apostles and the other sacrifice outlets in the deck, there is a high likelihood that opponents will simply not be able to maintain creatures on their board. If these enchantments are ruthless in your standard Aristocrats decks, in this one they're just plain unfair. We can also sacrifice 5 Apostles to Westvale Abbey to have it transform into Ormendal Profane Prince, which is definitely a huge beater. Not only is this a good alternative to using our Apostles in case some of our other strategies are stunted, but the Abbey itself is great since it makes human clerics. These clerics can also be sacrificed to trigger Taborax. It also costs a life to activate, which further synergizes with some of the other cards in the deck. Runescarred Demon is the final demon in the deck and is more of a Hail Mary in case Razaketh is dealt with. Cheating this demon onto the battlefield lets us tutor for any card when it enters the battlefield. That can still be Thrumming Stone if you're still in a position to get it, but it can also be used to get any of our backup plans in case Razaketh is no longer in the picture. It's also a 6/6 flyer with something to scoff at. The deck's also running Reliquary Tower for good measure in case we're drawing an epic amount of cards. It's also great to not have to discard any cards during our cleanup step if we sunk a lot of our life into Necropotence, which is amazing. The final way we can sacrifice Apostles for value is with Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Not only the Apostles, but any creature could be sacrificed for mana in a pinch. What's great about these is being able to sacrifice our creatures in response to effects that don't really destroy our creatures, since we do have the opportunity to reanimate them all later on. That being said, the main way we accelerate mana is via our swamps, thanks to Crypt Gas and Nirkana Revenant. These allow our swamps to tap for twice as much mana or thrice as much mana if they're both in play. The gas has the added bonus of having Extort, which also helps us recover life at the detriment of our opponents. This also helps us trigger the Exquisite Blood Sanguine Bond combo, as well as keep us ahead in life to potentially win with the Archfiend of Despair Necropotence combo. The Revenant can also be used as a mana sink as an epic beater since it has the Shade ability. We can also make the most of these abilities with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth that makes all of our lands into swamps. Obviously this goes great with Cabal Coffers and Lake of the Dead since they can then count any land we have on the battlefield. These are amazing at generating a ton of mana, which we might not necessarily need since we are cheating most of our things, but it doesn't hurt to have in case we have to hardcast anything. Being mono black means that we can also run Cabal Stronghold since the deck's running 22 snow-covered swamps. Unlike the Coffers, the Stronghold can tap for mana, but it does need 1 more mana to activate and only counts basic swamps. To say it's a nerfed Cabal Coffers is an understatement, but it does have its uses here. Other lands that can generate us a ton of black mana are Nykthos Shrine to Nyx and Crypt of Agadim. Being mono black with so many black pips on the battlefield, Nykthos is sure to generate a ton of black mana, no question. The Crypt, although it enters the battlefield tapped, can tap for black mana, and its other ability can tap for a large amount of black mana as well, since we're bound to have a ton of Apostles in our graveyard. With just 1 Apostle activation, we're going to have 6 of them there, so this would give us 4 net black mana. Ancient Tomb is the last land that can give us a lot of mana for what it's worth. It does help with a turn tomb Taborax, so there's that. It also deals us 2 damage, which is also useful for some of the synergies in the deck. We can also get that 2 colorless mana with Soul Ring and Mana Crypt in order to try and get that turn 2 Taborax. A turn 2 Taborax isn't necessary and isn't really a priority, but the sooner we can get it onto the battlefield, the sooner we can get even more advantage and value out of sacrificing Apostles. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Taborax Hope's Demise. Is running 40 copies of Shadowborn Apostle in this deck a bit overkill? Maybe. But if you're hearing this, then you've seen all the value you can get from them, whether it's assembling game-ending combos, amassing a huge horde of game-ending combatants, cheating fatties onto the battlefield, drawing cards, generating mana, gaining life, wiping the table of creatures, etc. There's just so much to do with the deck with just these 1 mana 1/1s. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.